Hello everybody, today I'm going to be making a box out of just paint sticks, and I'm going to add some wood burning and a trick opening lid to it. To start, I just cut a couple paint sticks so they were all exactly the same size by taping them together. After this, I marked out how I'm going to do the joinery, and I'm going to use some finger joints for this particular box that I'm making. I set the depth of the marking tool just simply using the paint sticks themselves to make sure I got as an accurate result as possible. After this, I used a simple scrap piece of wood to mark out the size of the finger joints, just roughly drawing out the size on the pieces of wood. After this, I cut out the finger joints using a knife. Normally you would use a saw, but because these pieces of wood were so thin, I was afraid putting them in the vise and using a saw on them wouldn't be good, and they could even possibly snap. So I just decided to use a knife and just slowly whittle away at these joints to make sure they were accurate. After this, they were not perfectly aligned and straight, so I sanded them with some really great sandpaper, making sure all of the shoulders were clean and the edges were flat, so I had a good joint. And then I used the fingers to mark the joint on the other sides of the box, and I also cut these out with a razor blade. And this worked too. I mean, not the best way to do joinery, but it definitely worked for this specific application. And if I could use a razor blade to do all joinery, I probably would. It's a very easy and very fast way to do it. This was obviously just a constant battle of checking and testing a little bit away, and then checking, and then taking a little bit off, and then checking again. And in the end, I actually got surprisingly tight joints on all of these, considering the material and the methods I used. So I just glued them all together, and this box wasn't perfectly square, but it worked for this application. So I decided that I want this box to be really pretty, so I sanded a lot. Started at 80, which wasn't rough enough, so then I went to 60, used a razor blade, and slowly just progressed through the grits of sandpaper to try to make the glossiest, smoothest surface possible. I wouldn't recommend doing this at all. It was deathly boring, and sanding is just never fun, but the end result was well worth the time. The main trick here was to use this leather, because that really polished the wood and gave it a sheen that it had. So as you can see, it was a very shiny surface. So after sanding all these pieces, I glued up the box, and after this I needed to make a bottom for the box. So using paint sticks, I started gluing up a panel. I just did 2 pieces at a time, and then after taking each one out of clamps, I sanded it and got all of the residual glue off. So these pieces I'm going to be doing a wood burning on, and I'm going to be wood burning the inscription that's on the ring in The Hobbit, which is one of Tolkien's books. So first I printed out the inscription, and then I traced it using pencil. I'm using a piece of plexiglass behind the paper here, so I could see through and trace more easily. And then I kind of burnished the lead onto the wood, and then went over it again so I could see it slightly better and actually be able to use that as a reference for my wood burning. And then I started wood burning, which is a very slow and semi-tedious process. The hardest part is giving an even burn, I guess you would say, on all of it, because the slower you go, the more it burns, but if you go too fast, it won't burn at all, so you have to have the exact same speed for all of the different letters. And if you make any mistakes, you can just sand over it, and you'll get kind of a fresh layer to work with again, which is nice. Wood burning tools are fun to use. I mean, this was the funnest part of the process for me, just tracing over and drawing out all of these shapes. One thing you might want to take into account is if you're going to do wood burning, you want to use a wood that doesn't have that much grain, because the grain lines are really hard to burn through. So if you have a pretty undecorated piece of wood as far as grain lines go, then it would be very easy to wood burn, because the wood burning tool wouldn't have any lines it wants to follow. You can see that especially here. As I go horizontally, the burn gets a lot deeper because that's the way that the wood burning tool actually wants to go. But in the end, this is very fun to do. You also might want to use a drier wood, because there were a couple moments here where water was just bubbling out of the wood, which I can't imagine is good for the wood and the structural integrity. So after this, I marked places for holes to sort of stitch together these pieces of wood, I guess you would say, which was a completely silly idea. No idea why I did it. Should have just stuck with doing a normal box, but I guess I decided to do this. Here's just some mineral oil as finish. Really makes that grain pop, even though being paint sticks, this grain is relatively boring. So here I am stitching together these pieces of wood. Initially, I guess I thought it would be easier to glue if I had another way of fastening the pieces together, but this was completely silly because I could have just glued them up two at once, or even glued them all together. I mean, it's not that difficult. So this is just an absurd part of the project that I wasted my time on. Also, this thread is just absolutely awful to use. It took hours to knot and do all that. Here I am marking the edges of the box on the wood burn parts, because I, in the end, want the wood burn parts to just slip into the box perfectly and become the bottom of the box. So this obviously required a lot of checking and testing and checking and testing, which is boring, so I just snapped through it. And then I just glued in these pieces, which in the end actually fitted really nicely. There's barely any gaps. I filled most of the gaps with sawdust. The thing I had to watch out for here is glue squeeze out, because it would be very hard to get out of the corners. So I cut up some more paint sticks to make the lid of the box, and I had to sand all of the edges so they would all glue together perfectly, which is why I would never recommend somebody work with paint sticks. They're a low quality wood, and they don't have straight edges. They require a lot of sanding, but it was what I had available, and it was a very interesting medium to try to do a project with. So I glued up all of these paint sticks in pairs, and then after this I glued the two sets of two together after sanding, making sure you couldn't see the marks of the inch markings that they for some reason have on paint sticks. So then I just use this paint trick to sort of book match, I guess you would say, these two pairs of paint sticks. And then I did this with both of them and put all of these together to make this 8 paint stick wide panel that in the end is going to be the top of this box. And this tape method of gluing up these pieces actually worked out really well for me, because clamping together really thin pieces is really difficult because it'll tend to buckle. So instead of sanding this panel to make it fit over the top, I just decided to use these hoof nippers to just clip off the wood and make it fit. Obviously I had to follow this up with sanding, but in the end it was a very fast and easy way to do this. So this is the beginning of the mechanism, I guess you would say, or trick opening part of this box. So I have all these dangling things coming off the lid, and they slide into the stitch that's on the bottom of the box, and it makes it very difficult to lift it up. The thing about this is it was very difficult to slide those little wood pieces under the stitch, so it was an incredibly impractical way to have a box. Also, it was incredibly easy to open because you just kind of had to jiggle around with it for like 5 seconds and it would work. So I whittled down the corners, made them slightly more chamfered so they would slide under more easily, and then I waxed the whole box, making it all nice and shiny, and the lid. And after waxing it, I waxed it a couple times and made sure I buffed out the wax to make sure it was as pretty as possible. Then I put a couple things in there and fidgeted with this lid mechanism for probably 10 minutes trying to get it to work. In the end, it was an awful way to do it, but I thought it was a pretty cool concept. See, if you lift the lid up, it doesn't actually come off all the way. It takes the box with it, and you have to slide it one way and then the other to get it to work at all, just to be able to pull the lid off. Then you can get to the contents of the box and see the beautiful wood-burned bottom. Thank you for watching.